So, Pope Leo XIV has just stripped every progressive bishop in the world of their power to veto the traditional Latin Mass. He has effectively overridden his predecessor's most divisive decree, and he has done it while delivering a stinging ultimatum to the traditionalist clergy that leaves them with no room to maneuver. Rome didn't see this coming. The announcement, a simple decree from the dicastery for divine worship and the discipline of the sacraments, landed not with a press conference, but with a terse bulletin on a Tuesday morning. The how is where this gets interesting, because this isn't a story about liturgy, it's a story about power. And Pope Leo XIV has just reclaimed all of it. The setup begins with a rule. On July 16, 2021, Pope Francis issued the motu proprio Traditionis Custodes, guardians of the tradition. It heavily restricted the celebration of the Roman Missal promulgated by Pope John XIII in 1962, commonly called the traditional Latin Mass. The document stated that it was the exclusive competence of the Bishop of Rome to regulate the liturgy, and it directed bishops to designate locations for the old rite that would not undermine the unity of the parish community. For many, it was seen as a reversal of Pope Benedict XVI's 2007 motu proprio Summorum Pontificum, which had liberalized the use of the older missal, framing it as an extraordinary form of the one Roman rite. Benedict's vision was one of reconciliation and mutual enrichment. Francis's document framed the issue as one of division and a rejection of the Second Vatican Council. The implementation, however, was not uniform. It relied on local bishops to execute its provisions, and that's where the loophole and the subsequent power struggle began. Bishops like Cardinal Blase Cupich of Chicago moved swiftly. In December of 2021, just months after Traditionis Custodes, Cupich issued a policy for his archdiocese that went beyond the Vatican text. It limited the traditional Latin Mass to only 2 locations in the entire archdiocese, both non-parish oratories. It forbade the celebration on Sundays at the main parish Mass times. It banned the use of parish churches for the old rite entirely, relegating it to chapels. And it required all priests seeking to celebrate it to request explicit permission and undergo specific training. This policy became a template. Other bishops across the United States and Europe followed suit, using their canonical authority as diocesan ordinaries to restrict the Mass far more severely than the Vatican document strictly mandated. They argued they were upholding unity. The traditionalist faithful argued they were being systematically erased. And for nearly 5 years, that was the stalemate. The Vatican had spoken, but the local bishops held the veto. If you're just joining us, consider subscribing for this deep dive into the most significant papal power play in a generation. Front A is Cardinal Blase Cupich's office in the Archbishop Quigley Center in Chicago. The date is August 12, 2026. A notification from the Vatican's dicastery for divine worship lands. The decree, issued with the explicit approval of Pope Leo XIV, is titled Decet Romanum Pontificem. It concerns the universal discipline of the sacred liturgy. Its operative clause is devastatingly simple. It revokes the ability of any diocesan bishop to issue general prohibitions or restrictions on the celebration of the Mass according to the 1962 Roman Missal that go beyond the specific text of Traditionis Custodes. More critically, it nullifies any such restrictions already in force, unless individually ratified by the dicastery within 60 days. The decree invokes the Pope's supreme, full, immediate, and universal ordinary power over the entire Church, as outlined in Canon 331 of the Code of Canon Law. In plain terms, Cardinal Cupich's December 2021 policy is dead. It is no longer canonically operative. The priests of the Archdiocese of Chicago are, as of that morning, free to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass according to the 1962 Missal under the original guidelines of Summorum Pontificum, provided they follow the few remaining universal norms from Traditionis Custodes, like not celebrating it in parish churches at the principal Sunday time. But the specific, draconian location bans, the permission structures, the training mandates, all of it is stripped away. The motive here is not liturgical preference. It is canonical authority. For 5 years, progressive prelates had used Traditionis Custodes as a shield and a sword. They wielded the document's call for unity as a justification for near-total suppression. But in doing so, they exercised a power that, in Leo XIV's reading, they never truly possessed in that absolute form. The 1983 Code of Canon Law states that a diocesan bishop governs his local church with legislative, executive, and judicial power. But that power is always subordinate to the supreme authority of the Roman pontiff. Traditionis Custodes was a papal law. It delegated certain executive functions to bishops. But the new decree argues that the bishops had effectively created new legislative restrictions, something beyond mere execution. They had turned a papal directive into a personal fiefdom of prohibition. And so Leo XIV's first major act is not to repeal Traditionis Custodes. It is to surgically remove the layer of bishop-led enforcement that had grown around it. He neutralizes the progressive bloc's most potent tool without publicly repudiating his predecessor. He doesn't attack the tree, he severs the roots. And you have to understand what that red hat represents. Cardinal Blase Cupich was appointed Archbishop of Chicago by Pope Francis in 2014. He is a central figure in the so-called Francis Project. His liturgical policies were seen as a bellwether for the entire American Church. His swift and severe implementation of Traditionis Custodes was a signal to other bishops: this is the model. Follow it. The power to shape the liturgical life of a diocese is among a bishop's most tangible powers. It defines the spiritual experience of the faithful. By stripping that power away in this specific arena, Leo XIV is sending a message that reverberates far beyond Chicago. It reaches into dioceses in Germany, Belgium, and elsewhere where similar restrictive policies had been enacted. The message is that the central authority in Rome is reasserting itself. The bishops are not sovereigns, they are vicars, and the Pope is the vicar of Christ. This move has a deep history well. The centralization of liturgical authority is not a modern invention. It follows the Council of Trent. Before Trent, from the 9th to the 16th centuries, you had a proliferation of local rites. The Sarum Jus in England, the Mozarabic rite in Toledo, the Ambrosian rite in Milan. The Council of Trent, responding to the Protestant Reformation's challenges to the sacraments and the Mass, initiated a process of standardization. Pope Pius V, in 1570, promulgated the Roman Missal with the bull Quo Primum. That bull made the Roman Missal mandatory for every diocese that could not prove a liturgical tradition of at least 200 years. It was a monumental act of papal centralization. The liturgy became a unifying force, a bulwark against doctrinal deviation. The Pope became the ultimate guarantor of liturgical unity. That model held, with minor variations, for 400 years. Then came the Second Vatican Council and its constitution on the sacred liturgy, Sacrosanctum Concilium, promulgated in 1963. It called for a reform of the liturgical books to make the rites more accessible to the faithful. It also granted conferences of bishops certain permissions to adapt the liturgy to local cultures. within defined limits. But the core authority remained in Rome. The post-conciliar period saw the creation of the Novus Ordo Missae, the new order of Mass, by Pope Paul VI in 1969. And it was Paul VI who, facing resistance from Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre and the Society of St. Pius X, took a hard line. He insisted on the universal adoption of the new rite as an expression of ecclesial communion. The Lefebvrist schism was, at its heart, a dispute over liturgical authority and the legitimacy of the Council. The Pope's right to reform the liturgy was the non-negotiable point. Every modern Pope since has reaffirmed that principle. Benedict XVI, even while liberalizing the old rite, never ceded the papal prerogative. He acted from the center. Francis acted from the center. Now Leo XIV is acting from the center, but with a twist that targets the intermediaries. The paper trail is precise. The Decree Decit Romanum Pontificem exists within a web of canonical concepts. One key concept is dispensation. In canon law, a dispensation is the relaxation of a merely ecclesiastical law in a particular case. Some bishops, in more liberal dioceses, had used their power of dispensation to allow the traditional Latin Mass to continue in ways that technically violated Traditionis Custodes. They were bypassing the Vatican's restrictions through local mercy. Leo XIV's decree flips this. It is, in effect, a universal dispensation granted from the top, nullifying the restrictive laws enacted by bishops. It uses the Pope's higher power of dispensation to override the bishop's lower power of governance. It's a canonical masterstroke. It doesn't create a new rite. It removes an illegitimate obstacle. It appeals to the Pope's role as the supreme judge and lawgiver, a role with roots in the medieval papacy. He is not giving the traditionalists everything they want. He is taking something away from the progressives that he argues they never should have had. Front B opens in another office, this one in Rome. Cardinal Raymond Burke, the former prefect of the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Signatura, the Church's highest court, receives the same decree, but attached to it is a separate document, a nota explicativa from the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. This note is not public. It is addressed to all clergy currently celebrating the 1962 Missal, and it delivers the second part of Leo XIV's ultimatum. It mandates that any priest or bishop who wishes to continue celebrating the traditional Latin Mass under the newly restored norms must, within 90 days, publicly swear an oath. This oath, to be taken in the presence of the local ordinary or his delegate, must contain a clear and unambiguous affirmation of the validity and legitimacy of the Novus Ordo Mass promulgated by Pope Paul VI, and an acknowledgement that the liturgical reforms mandated by the Second Vatican Council's Sacrosanctum Concilium are a legitimate exercise of the Church's magisterial authority. Furthermore, it requires an explicit promise of obedience to the Pope and the bishops in communion with him regarding the discipline of the liturgy. The shockwave through the traditionalist camp is immediate and profound. Cardinal Burke is not just any cardinal. He is the patron of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, a canonical jurist of the highest order, and a figure revered by traditionalists. In 2016, he was one of 4 cardinals who submitted a set of dubia, or doubts, to Pope Francis, seeking clarification on points of doctrine in the post-synodal exhortation Amoris Laetitia. He has been a vocal critic of certain interpretations of Vatican II. For him, and for many in his circle, the Novus Ordo Mass represents a rupture, a break with tradition. While they would formally acknowledge its validity, it is celebrated by a validly ordained priest with the correct matter and form, they often question its theological expression, its aesthetic, its orientation. To demand a public oath affirming its legitimacy and the legitimacy of the Council's reforms is to demand a capitulation of conscience. It forces a moment of definitive, public submission. This is the braid. While Front A deals with the neutralization of progressive episcopal power, Front B deals with the corralling of traditionalist dissent. Leo XIV is not replaying Benedict XVI's strategy. Benedict sought to bring traditionalists back into the fold through generosity, hoping the beauty of the old rite would heal divisions. Leo XIV is using the old rite as leverage. He is giving with one hand, restoring access to the liturgy they love, while extracting a pound of doctrinal flesh with the other. He is proving, in the most dramatic way possible, that he is not a factional puppet. He is not the traditionalist pope some hoped for. He is the papal pope. His authority is not ideological, it is monarchical, and he demands obedience from all sides. The history well here is the story of the Society of Saint Pius X. Founded by Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre in 1970, the SSPX rejected the Novus Ordo Mass and key aspects of Vatican II. Decades of strained dialogue followed. Benedict XVI lifted the excommunications of their bishops in 2009, a move that backfired when one bishop denied the Holocaust. He sought a doctrinal preamble to regularize them. They refused to sign anything that implied full acceptance of the Council. The talks stalled. The SSPX exists in a canonical limbo, not in schism, but not in full communion. Their priests do not celebrate the Novus Ordo. They do not affirm Vatican II in the way Leo XIV's oath demands. This new ultimatum is a line in the sand for the wider traditionalist movement within the Church's formal structure. It says, you can have the old Mass, but you must publicly swear fealty to the new. There is no middle ground. This is designed to prevent the growth of a new Lefebvrist movement from within the ranks of clergy loyal to Rome. It is a preemptive strike against schism. The numbers matter. The decree affects every diocese where a bishop imposed extra restrictions. That's dozens of dioceses in the United States alone, and scores across Europe. The oath mandate affects every priest who celebrates the 1962 Missal. According to a 2025 survey by the Latin Mass Society, that number was approximately 5,000 priests worldwide before Traditionis Custodes, with a sharp decline afterward. Even a conservative estimate puts the number currently at over 2,000. Each one now faces a personal, public decision. Swear the oath and continue, or refuse and lose the right to celebrate the ancient liturgy. For a young priest who entered seminary out of love for that tradition, it is an agonizing choice. For an older priest who has lived through the post-conciliar battles, it feels like a final judgment. The press war begins instantly. The National Catholic Register, on August 12, 2026, leads with the headline, Pope Leo XIV restores access to Latin Mass, curbs bishops' power. It frames the move as a rebalancing. Vatican News, the same day, publishes a more anodyne piece titled Pope Issues Decree on Liturgical Discipline, focusing on the Pope's role as guarantor of unity. More progressive outlets, like the National Catholic Reporter, will inevitably frame it as a betrayal and a capitulation to traditionalist pressure. More traditionalist outlets, like The Remnant or 1 Peter 5, will focus on the oath, decrying it as a coerced act of ideological submission. The secular press will largely miss the nuance, reporting it as a simple reversal of Pope Francis. None of these framings are fully correct. That's the genius and the brutality of the move. The turn happens in the silence after the announcement. In Chicago, priests at the two approved oratories check their emails. They read the decree, they look at each other, they realize they can, in theory, schedule more masses. They can, in theory, request to celebrate in a parish church on a weekday, but they also receive the oath mandate. Their celebration is now contingent on a public act of assent they may find difficult. The victory is poisoned. In Rome, Cardinal Burke convenes a small group of canonists and theologians in his residence. They pass the language of the oath. Is it a simple affirmation of validity, which canon law already requires, or is it an affirmation of the legitimacy of the reforms, a more theological and historical judgment? The wording is deliberate and broad. It is designed to be unpassable. It demands a simple yes or no commitment. There is no room for a footnote, for a but, for a personal reservation. It is the loyalty oath of a sovereign to his subjects. And the pressure builds on the other side. Cardinal Cupich does not make a public statement on the first day. The Archdiocese of Chicago issues a one-line acknowledgement that it has received the decree and is studying it with canon lawyers. But the studying is a formality. The decree is immediately executable. It requires no local implementation. It is law by publication. The power he wielded for 5 years is gone. The political capital spent enforcing that policy is now a sunk cost. The faithful who fought him are vindicated, but now face their own dilemma. The traditionalist laity in Chicago might soon have more access to the Mass they love, but only if their priests swear an oath that many of those same laity might find objectionable. The unity Pope Leo XIV imposes is a tense, enforced unity. It is not born of organic agreement, but of canonical fiat. This tension builds for days. Commentators scramble. Bishops' conferences issue cautious, confused statements. The Vatican remains silent, letting the decree speak for itself. The narrative in the media splits into the two threads: the defeat of the progressive bishops and the trap set for the traditionalists. But few connect them into a single, coherent strategy. They are seen as separate actions, perhaps even contradictory. It's only when you step back and look at the machinery of power that the picture clarifies. The two moves are gears in the same clockwork. One cannot function without the other. To restore the liturgy without demanding doctrinal submission would empower the Lefebvrists within. To demand submission without restoring the liturgy would be a naked act of tyranny with no offer of peace. Leo XIV has offered the peace, but it is a peace with conditions, and the conditions are absolute. And this is the reality that has left both factions in Rome entirely paralyzed. Pope Leo XIV didn't restore the Latin Mass to hand the traditionalists a victory. He restored it to strip the progressive bishops of their power, while simultaneously forcing the hardliners to bend the knee to papal supremacy. The analytical revelation is this: the core issue was never the Mass itself, it was authority. The progressive bishops had used their delegated authority to create a de facto national church model, where their interpretation of a papal document became local law. The traditionalist clergy and their supporters had used their canonical right to the old rite to create a parallel magisterium, where their liturgical practice implicitly judged the reforms of the council as deficient. Both were forms of dissent. Both eroded the central authority of the papacy. Leo XIV's move attacks both forms of dissent simultaneously. He re-centralizes power in the office of the Roman pontiff. He says, "You will not build your fiefdoms on the left or the right. The liturgy and the doctrine that undergirds it flows from this chair, and to this chair you will submit." It is a vision of the papacy that is neither liberal nor conservative. It is ultramontane. It is the vision of Pius IX, of Pius X, of Paul VI. It is papal monarchy, pure and simple. The consequences of this peak moment are immediate and long-term. In the short term, Cardinal Cupich and bishops of like mind are neutered. They cannot react without appearing disobedient to the Pope. Their only recourse is private persuasion, but the decree is already law. Their power base, built on strict enforcement, evaporates. They must now oversee a flourishing of the very liturgy they sought to contain. For Cardinal Burke and the traditionalist clergy, the 90-day clock is ticking. Each priest must make his choice. Some will swear the oath, perhaps with mental reservations. Some will refuse and cease celebrating the old rite, becoming simple Novus Ordo priests, their hearts broken. A small number may leave the canonical structure entirely, seeking refuge with the SPX or other irregular groups, further marginalizing themselves. The oath acts as a filter. It will separate the integrist from the simply devout. The meaning for the average Catholic in the pew is complex. In many dioceses, the traditional Latin Mass will become more accessible. Parishes that had it suppressed might see its return. That is a tangible win for those communities. But the atmosphere will be charged. The priests celebrating that Mass will have sworn an oath affirming the very liturgy that replaced it. This creates a cognitive dissonance. It forces a kind of internal reconciliation on the faithful. They are being told, by the Pope himself, that the two forms are not in opposition, that one does not condemn the other, that you can love the ancient liturgy while affirming the legitimacy of the new. For many, this is a theological bridge too far. For others, it may be the path to a genuine, if uneasy, peace. The press war will escalate. The progressive wing will argue that Leo XIV has undermined the collegiality of the bishops, a key theme of Vatican II. They will say he has centralized power in a dangerous way. The traditionalist wing will argue he has imposed a false unity, forcing them to affirm errors. They will question whether an oath taken under such duress is morally binding. The secular narrative will solidify around Pope reverses Pope, missing the subtlety. But within the Vatican walls, the message is clear. The pontificate of Leo XIV will be defined by a forceful reassertion of papal primacy. Every dicastery, every nunciature, every bishop's conference now understands that the man in the apostolic palace is not a figurehead. He is an active monarch. He will use his authority. He will not govern by committee or by faction. Looking forward, 3 scenarios branch out. Scenario 1. The decree holds. Bishops grudgingly comply. Traditionalist priests mostly swear the oath, and a new, tense equilibrium sets in. The liturgy wars cool from a boil to a simmer. The Pope turns his attention to other matters, having decisively won this battle. Scenario 2. Resistance coalesces. A group of progressive bishops files a formal challenge, perhaps questioning the decree's canonical validity. A group of traditionalist clergy, perhaps led by a prominent figure, publicly refuses the oath and faces suspension. The conflict escalates, leading to formal canonical penalties and a more polarized church. Scenario 3. The move is so successful that it becomes a model. Leo XIV uses similar tactics on other contentious issues: morality, ecclesiology, ecumenism, reimposing a clear, centralized line and demanding oaths of fidelity. The Church becomes more uniform, more disciplined, but also more resistant to the local adaptations Vatican II envisioned. The weighty close is this. For centuries, the papacy has grappled with the tension between unity and diversity, between central command and local adaptation. The Second Vatican Council attempted a balancing act, affirming papal primacy while elevating the role of the bishops. The post-conciliar period has been a slow-motion struggle over what that balance means. Pope Francis leaned into the authority of local bishops until he saw that authority creating division. Pope Benedict leaned into the authority of tradition until he saw that tradition being used to critique the seat of Peter. Pope Leo XIV has chosen a different path. He has invoked the most ancient, most absolute understanding of papal power. He has cut the knot. He has not chosen a side in the liturgical civil war. He has declared the war itself an act of disobedience. And in doing so, he has reminded everyone, from the cardinal in his palace to the priest in his parish, that in the Catholic Church there is only one ultimate source of authority. All other claims to power, whether from the left or the right, derive from it and can be revoked by it. The era of factional pontificates may be over. The era of the papal monarch has returned.